On August 10, 1992, in room 401 of Cairo's Qasr El Medina Hotel, an elderly man lay dying. The afternoon heat pressed against the windows as 78-year-old Tariq Hussein Farid drifted in and out of consciousness. Stomach cancer had ravaged him for months. A local doctor administered morphine to ease his pain. His breathing was shallow, his face peaceful. Within hours, he would be dead. They would wrap his body according to Islamic custom and bury him in a cemetery on the city's edge with a small marker. A quiet ending, Lee. But Tariq Hussein Farid wasn't this man's real name. His real name was Aribert Heim, and for nearly half a century he'd been one of the world's most wanted Nazi war criminals. While he died peacefully with morphine dulling his pain, the ghosts of his victims, men who screamed as he carved into their living bodies, who begged for mercy as he injected poison into their hearts, who died in unspeakable agony on his operating table, had been waiting. Justice never came for them. It never came for him. This is Aribert Heim's story, and it's hard to stomach. June 28, 1914, Bad Radkersburg, Austria. A child named Aribert was born in a small town near the Slovenian border. His father was a police officer, his mother a homemaker. They were ordinary, middle-class, respectable people. The family attended church. Aribert grew up with two siblings. He was bright, curious, and excelled in school, particularly in sciences. Teachers noted his intelligence and discipline. Nothing about this boy suggested he would become a monster. Post-World War I, Austria was a humiliated nation. The Austro-Hungarian Empire had collapsed, territory had been carved away, the economy was in shambles. Young Aribert grew up amid resentment and loss, watching adults talk about betrayal, stolen greatness, and the need to restore what was taken. In 1933, at 19, Aribert Heim enrolled at the University of Graz to study medicine. He was going to be a doctor, a healer. But 1933 was also the year Hitler became Chancellor of Germany. Nazi ideology spread like poison across German-speaking Europe. In Austria, where the Nazi Party was technically illegal, it operated in shadows, recruiting the young, angry, and ambitious. Aribert Heim joined the Sturmabteilung, the SA Brownshirts, in 1935 at 21. Nobody forced him. He chose to put on that uniform, to march, to swear allegiance to a movement built on hatred and racial supremacy. When Germany annexed Austria in March 1938 during the Anschluss, Heim celebrated in the streets with thousands of others. Within months, he joined the Waffen-SS voluntarily. The SS didn't conscript, they selected. Aribert Heim, the medical student, applied, passed their racial purity standards, and swore absolute loyalty to Hitler. He became SS Hauptsturmführer, Captain Aribert Heim. He completed his medical degree in 1940 and continued training in surgery. He was skilled, precise, methodical. His superiors noted his competence and coldness. Some colleagues later remembered something unsettling about him even then, a detachment, an absence of warmth. But in wartime, such qualities could be mistaken for professional discipline. In October 1941, Dr. Aribert Heim received his assignment to Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria. Mauthausen was classified Grade 3rd, the worst designation, reserved for enemies of the Reich considered irredeemable. The camp sat on a hill overlooking the Danube, with a granite quarry below featuring 186 steps called the Stairway of Death, where prisoners were worked to death carrying massive stones. The mortality rate was astronomical. This was where they sent people to die. Heim arrived as a camp physician. Officially, his job was conducting medical examinations of incoming prisoners, treating sick inmates, and maintaining health records. But Mauthausen wasn't about health. It was about death. And for the first time, Aribert Heim had real power. Absolute power over hundreds of human beings with no rights, no protections, no hope. The intoxication of that power would reveal who he truly was. Within weeks, prisoners whispered about the new doctor. They called him Dr. Death and warned each other, "Don't get sick. Don't report to the infirmary. Whatever you do, don't end up in Heim's hands." Because Dr. Heim didn't heal, he experimented and killed. What makes this disturbing is that Aribert Heim wasn't conducting experiments ordered by higher authorities or following protocols. He wasn't contributing to any research program. What he did for himself, for practice, curiosity and entertainment. And Karl Lotter was a healthy 26-year-old Austrian resistance fighter arrested for distributing anti-Nazi leaflets. During his intake examination in early 1942, Heim noticed Lotter had unusually healthy teeth. Perfect, really. Heim called over an assistant and ordered Lotter into the dental chair. Then, without anesthesia or any medical justification, Heim extracted every single tooth from Lotter's mouth. Every one. Lotter's screams echoed through the infirmary. Heim worked methodically, tooth after tooth, ignoring the blood, pleading and agony. When finished, he examined the teeth like specimens, dropped them in a jar, and walked away. Karl Lotter bled for hours, but somehow survived Mauthausen. After the war, he testified about Dr. Death, showing his toothless mouth as evidence. Hans Meyerhofer was 18, a Jehovah's Witness imprisoned for refusing military service. When he developed a minor treatable infection, Heim brought him to the operating room claiming he would drain it. Instead, without anesthesia, Heim performed unauthorized surgery, opening Meyerhofer's abdomen and removing organs, stomach, liver, parts of intestines. He wanted to see, he told an assistant, how long a human could survive without these organs. Meyerhofer was conscious, screaming, begging. Heim worked with focused concentration, removed what he wanted, placed the organs in metal basins, and stitched Meyerhofer back up. Then he sat nearby, watching, timing, taking notes. Hans Meyerhofer died 4 hours later in unimaginable agony. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. Another prisoner, a middle-aged Jewish man from Vienna whose name is lost to history, complained of a headache during examination. Heim smiled, witnesses remembered that smile, and told the man he'd give him something for the pain. He filled a syringe with gasoline and injected it directly into the man's heart. The prisoner convulsed, his body arched, his eyes bulged. Heim stood there watching, timing with his stopwatch. The man died in 3 minutes. Heim recorded the time in his notebook. A doctor who took an oath to do no harm was injecting gasoline into a human heart and timing the death like a laboratory experiment. Heim didn't always kill quickly. Sometimes he wanted to observe prolonged suffering. He injected various chemicals directly into prisoners' hearts, benzene, phenol, petroleum, just to see what happened. He performed amputations without anesthesia on healthy prisoners, claiming he needed surgical practice. He removed organs from living subjects to see how long they'd remain conscious. He deliberately withheld pain medication, telling assistants that screaming interfered with his concentration, but that he wanted to observe the body's natural response to trauma. Even hardened SS officers found this disturbing. Other camp physicians complained about Heim's methods, not because they objected morally, they all participated in genocide, but because Heim's sadism was excessive even by Mauthausen standards. He didn't just follow the extermination program, he innovated, personalized, and enjoyed it. Survivors later described his demeanor: cold, detached, mask-like face, glassy eyes. He whistled while he worked and made jokes. When prisoners screamed, he told them to be quiet. When they begged for mercy, he ignored them completely, as if they hadn't spoken. He treated human beings worse than laboratory animals. Even vivisectionists of that era used anesthesia on dogs. What kind of person does this? What kind of person looks into another human's eyes, sees their terror, hears their pleas, and then inflicts calculated, creative suffering? The answer reveals something uncomfortable about human nature. Under certain conditions, Ordinary people, educated, intelligent people, can become monsters not because they're forced or ignorant, but because they choose it, because power corrupts, because ideology provides permission, because cruelty, once begun, can become addictive. Heim served at Mauthausen for only 2 months, October to December 1941, just 2 months. But in that brief time he killed dozens, maybe hundreds. The exact number will never be known because he didn't keep accurate records of his experiments, and because Mauthausen's death rate was so high that a few dozen more murders barely registered in the statistics. In December 1941, he transferred to the SS Division Viking on the Eastern Front, later serving with the 6th SS Mountain Division Nord in Finland as a field surgeon, a legitimate role treating wounded German soldiers. He was competent and respected. Nobody on the front knew about Mauthausen. To them, he was just Dr. Heim, a good officer, a skilled surgeon. The monster wore a human face. May 1945. Germany collapsed. Hitler committed suicide. The 1,000-year Reich ended in rubble and ash. Aribert Heim was captured by American forces and briefly interned as a prisoner of war, but his crimes at Mauthausen weren't yet known. His name wasn't on the initial war criminals list. The Americans released him in 1947. He walked free. He returned to Bad Radkersburg and resumed civilian life, opening a gynecology practice in Baden-Baden, Germany. Women trusted him with their bodies. He delivered their babies. He was respected in the community, joined the local tennis club, drove a nice car, lived in a comfortable apartment. For years, this was his life. Dr. Heim, the doctor, the healer, the pillar of the community. But survivors remembered. Karl Lotter, whose teeth were torn out, had contacted war crimes investigators and told them about Dr. Death. Other survivors had too. In 1962, 17 years after the war, German authorities finally connected the dots, realizing the respectable gynecologist in Baden-Baden was the same man who tortured prisoners at Mauthausen. They issued an arrest warrant. Someone warned Heim, probably a friend in the police. On September 18, 1962, one day before the warrant was executed, Aribert Heim disappeared. He left his practice, apartment and life behind, took his savings, got in his Mercedes and drove across the border, first to France, then Spain. Then, using contacts in the underground network that helped Nazi fugitives escape, the same network that smuggled Adolf Eichmann to Argentina and Josef Mengele to Brazil, Heim made his way to Egypt. Cairo became his refuge. Egypt under Nasser had no extradition treaty with Germany. The city was full of former Nazis working as military advisors, weapons dealers, and intelligence consultants. Heim converted to Islam, taking the name Tariq Hussein Farid. He grew a beard, learned Arabic, worked at a hospital, then opened a small hotel, the Qasr El Madina. He became part of the expat community, sending money back to his family in Germany through intermediaries. His wife divorced him. His children grew up barely knowing him. For 30 years he lived in Cairo. For 30 years, Nazi hunters searched for him. The Simon Wiesenthal Center listed him as most wanted. They received tips. He's in Spain, South America, Uruguay, Chile. Every lead went nowhere. Meanwhile, the German government conducted a formal investigation, interviewing survivors. Karl Lotter testified. So did Leopold Altenburg, who witnessed Heim's injections. So did former SS guards who served alongside Heim and could corroborate specific incidents. The evidence was overwhelming. In 1979, German courts tried Heim in absentia, convicting him of murder with a sentence of life imprisonment. But he wasn't there to serve it. He was in Cairo, running his hotel, drinking tea in cafes, living peacefully. This is the perverse reality. While his victims died in agony, while Hans Meyerhofer bled out on an operating table, while that nameless Jewish man convulsed from gasoline in his heart, While Karl Lotter screamed through the extraction of every tooth, Aribert Heim lived comfortably in exile with money, freedom, and peace. In the 1980s, Heim's health began failing. He developed stomach cancer, slow and progressive. By 1990, he was in constant pain. By 1991, he could barely leave his apartment above the hotel. A local Egyptian doctor tended to him, knowing him only as Tarek, the elderly German Muslim who owned the Qasr El Medina. He didn't know about Mauthausen, the experiments, or that he was treating one of history's monsters. August 1992, the cancer reached its final stage. Heim was bedridden in room 401. His friend Mahmoud Doma visited regularly, as did the doctor, bringing morphine for pain relief, the very thing Heim denied his victims. He received it freely in generous doses. He was lucid enough to speak sometimes about Egypt, his hotel, the weather. He didn't talk about Austria, the war, or Mauthausen. On August 10, 1992, Aribert Heim died. The morphine made his passing easy. No pain, no fear. He simply stopped breathing. They called it a natural death from cancer and old age. 78 years is a long life. They washed his body according to Islamic custom, wrapped it in white cloth, and buried him in a cemetery on Cairo's outskirts. A simple grave with a small marker bearing his Muslim name, Tariq Hussein Farid, 1914-1992. For 15 more years, the world didn't know. Nazi hunters kept searching. The Wiesenthal Center kept him on their most wanted list. Investigators chased leads in South America, Europe, and Africa. They didn't know he was already dead, that he'd died peacefully, surrounded by friends, his pain managed by medicine, his body given a respectful burial. Not until 2009, 17 years after his death, did the truth emerge. German journalists tracked down Heim's son, Rüdiger Heim, who admitted his father died in Egypt in 1992. They found hotel records, the doctor's notes, and the grave. DNA testing on Heim's belongings confirmed it. The hunt was over. The monster died free. Now comes the difficult question that makes us uncomfortable. Was this justice? Some argue Heim's death in exile was its own punishment, that he lived as a fugitive for 30 years, separated from family, unable to return home, always looking over his shoulder. That dying alone in a foreign country, converted to a religion adopted from necessity rather than faith, buried under a false name in an unmarked grave, was its own kind of hell. Others believe this is obscene, that 30 comfortable years in Cairo running a hotel, making friends, receiving medical care, and dying peacefully with morphine is paradise compared to what his victims endured. Hans Meyerhofer, dead at 18 with his organs removed, got nothing. The nameless man who received gasoline in his heart got nothing. Karl Lotter, who survived but lived without teeth and without justice, watching his torturer escape, he got nothing. There was no trial where Heim faced his victims, no moment where survivors could confront him and make him look at what he'd done, no public accounting, no acknowledgement, no remorse. Because Heim never, in 30 years of exile, expressed any, not to his son, not to his friends, not on his deathbed. He simply lived his life and died as if Mauthausen had never happened. This makes Aribert Heim's story particularly haunting. Most infamous Nazi doctors met some form of justice. Josef Mengele drowned in Brazil, hunted and paranoid. Horst Schumann was extradited and imprisoned. Eduard Wirths committed suicide in British custody, but Heim got away with it completely. He died of natural causes at 78, the same age many of his victims would have reached had he not murdered them. What does this reveal about the universe, about justice, about the idea that evil gets punished? Nothing comforting. It reveals that sometimes monsters win, that sometimes the wicked prosper and die peacefully, that justice isn't cosmic or guaranteed. It's something humans must actively pursue. And when they fail, when they're too slow, when the fugitive is too careful and the refugee too welcoming, evil escapes unpunished. Let's talk about the victims, because that's what gets lost in the story of the hunt, the escape, the peaceful death. Karl Lotter survived Mauthausen and Heim's torture. He survived the war, testified against Heim in 1979, told the court what happened in that dental chair, showed his mouth, and relived the pain. He did everything the justice system asked. Then he watched as Heim remained free. Karl Lotter died in 2002, 10 years after Heim, never knowing his torturer was already dead. He died still waiting for justice. Leopold Altenburg testified too. He witnessed Heim inject poison into victims' hearts, described watching men die in convulsions, gave specific dates and names. He was believed, but Heim wasn't there to face him. Altenburg died in 1995, 3 years after Heim, also never knowing. Hans Meyerhofer has no grave, no marker. The Nazis didn't keep records of experimental victims. His family reported him missing after the war, but never found out exactly when or how he died. They never knew about the operating room, the organs in basins, the 4 hours of agony. They just knew he never came home. The nameless Jewish man from Vienna who got gasoline injected in his heart. We don't even know who he was. His identity is lost. His family probably thought he died in a gas chamber or from typhus or starvation. They never knew a doctor sworn to heal murdered him as an experiment. These weren't statistics or numbers. They were individual human beings with names, families, and futures. Sons, brothers, husbands with dreams and plans who wanted to live. Aribert Heim took that from them, not because he was ordered to, not because military necessity demanded it, not because they posed any threat. He took it because he could, because he was curious, because in that moment their lives meant less to him than his desire to see what would happen. After the war, West Germany established a compensation fund for Nazi victims. Survivors who could prove they were subjected to medical experiments received payments. Karl Lotter received 5,000 Deutsche Marks, about 1,200, for having all his teeth ripped out without anesthesia. That's what the German government decided the torture was worth. Lotter said later he would have given every penny back just to see Heim in handcuffs. But Heim never wore handcuffs, never stood trial, never faced his victims, never had to answer for what he did. The grave in Cairo still exists. After the 2009 revelation, there was discussion about exhuming the body and returning it to Austria. Some survivors wanted Heim's remains to face symbolic trial, wanted him dug up and reburied without ceremony in an unmarked grave in Potter's Field. But Egyptian authorities refused. Islamic law prohibits exhumation except under extraordinary circumstances. So Heim remains there under his false name in a Muslim cemetery, the pretense maintained even in death. His victims have no such graves. Most died at Mauthausen and were cremated, their ashes dumped in the Danube or buried in mass graves. There's a memorial at Mauthausen now, a museum with plaques bearing names when known, testimony from survivors, photographs. But no individual graves, no markers, no place for families to visit and mourn. This is the asymmetry. Heim gets a grave, peace, morphine for his pain, friends at his bedside. His victims got screaming and terror and metal basins and stopwatches and cold, glassy eyes watching them die. Some historians argue Heim represents a particular type of Nazi criminal, not the ideologue or the bureaucrat implementing policy, but the individual sadist who used the system's permission structure to indulge his darkest impulses. He didn't have to torture prisoners. Other camp doctors examined inmates and sent them to work or death without personal cruelty. Heim chose to torture, chose to experiment, chose to inflict suffering beyond what was ordered or expected. This makes his escape more painful because it means pure, deliberate evil went unpunished. There's no complex moral calculus here, no following orders defense, no bureaucratic distance. Heim personally, directly, deliberately tortured human beings for his own purposes. And he died free. What remains? What's Aribert Heim's legacy? He's remembered, if at all, as the Nazi who got away, the one the hunters missed, the name on the list that never got crossed off. He appears in documentaries about Nazi fugitives, in books about the failure of post-war justice. The Wiesenthal Center still mentions him as an example of how long some criminals manage to hide, but mostly he's forgotten. The general public doesn't know his name like they know Mengele or Eichmann. He didn't reach the same notoriety. His victims weren't numerous enough to make headlines. His experiments weren't part of a larger program historians study. He was just one doctor in one camp for 2 months who killed dozens in uniquely horrible ways and then vanished. His son, Rüdiger Heim, defended him for years, insisting his father wasn't a war criminal and that allegations were exaggerated. Then, when finally forced to admit Aribert died in Cairo, Rüdiger claimed his father lived in poverty, suffered terribly, and paid the price through exile and isolation. This is the denial that enables evil, the refusal to acknowledge what was done, the rewriting of perpetrator as victim. The hotel in Cairo still operates under different owners. They don't advertise its history. Most guests have no idea the elderly German Muslim who owned it before was one of history's monsters. They check in, sleep in the rooms, check out. Life continues. The infirmary at Mauthausen is part of the memorial site. You can visit and stand in the room where Heim worked, tortured and killed. There's a plaque with clinical language. Medical experiments were conducted here. It doesn't capture the screaming, the begging, the glassy-eyed doctor with his scalpel and stopwatch and absolute power. Here's what haunts me about this story. What should haunt you? Aribert Heim was educated and intelligent. He studied medicine and took the Hippocratic Oath. He understood anatomy, physiology, the mechanisms of pain. He knew exactly what he was doing when he removed organs from living prisoners. He knew they would suffer and die in agony. He knew, and he did it anyway, not in a moment of passion, not in self-defense, not under immediate coercion. He did it methodically, repeatedly, creatively. This means the capacity for such evil exists in the human species, in educated, intelligent members. It doesn't require ignorance, insanity, or supernatural wickedness. It just requires the right circumstances. Power without accountability, ideology that dehumanizes victims, a system that permits or encourages cruelty, and apparently some people will transform into monsters. But here's the other part we don't like to think about. Heim wasn't unique. There were other doctors like him at other camps, guards who beat prisoners to death for entertainment, bureaucrats who designed more efficient killing methods. And most didn't face justice either. Most resumed normal lives, became teachers, businessmen, doctors again, lived peacefully, died peacefully. The post-war reckoning was incomplete. The famous trials, Nuremberg, Eichmann, the later prosecutions, caught some but missed most. Thousands of perpetrators simply blended back into society, changed their names or didn't bother, and lived out their lives. The machinery of justice was too slow, too overwhelmed, too willing to move on. So Aribert Heim's story isn't exceptional. It's representative. He represents all the ones who got away, all the unpunished evil, all the victims who never saw justice, all the questions about human nature we still can't answer. On August 10th, 1992, in a hotel room in Cairo, a 78-year-old man died peacefully with pain managed, friends present, and dignity maintained. 51 years earlier, in an infirmary at Mauthausen, an 18-year-old screamed as a doctor removed his organs without anesthesia. He died in agony after 4 hours, no dignity, no mercy, no justice.